This is absolutely worthless work. That was the sentence he hurled at me, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls of the executive suite. 32 senior vice presidents sat around that polished glass conference table, their eyes glued to the table as if looking up might draw the lightning toward them. I remember the exact way he picked up my acquisition proposal. The document represented 6 months of my life, weeks of sleepless nights, and endless coordination with legal and financial experts. Julian Vance, the chief executive officer of Vance Enterprises, and a man who had built his entire career on a reputation of absolute ruthlessness, pinched the bound pages between his index finger and thumb as if it were a biohazard. Then, with a slow, deliberate twist of his wrists, he tore the contract down the middle. He did not do it metaphorically. He did it physically. A $2,800,000 deal, ripped in half and tossed onto the glossy table like junk mail. "This is what you think your acquisition strategy is worth," Julian sneered, his lip curling in contempt. "You are clearly not ready for the big leagues, Dean. My name is Dean Gifford. I am 49 years old, and at that precise second, I had to choose between screaming, walking out, or committing a federal offense. I had spent 25 years in corporate acquisitions, building a reputation for being the quiet professional. I was the guy who triple-checked every cash flow projection, who read the footnotes in the auditor reports, and who never raised his voice even when the room was burning down. But as I watched those torn sheets of paper drift across the table, something deep inside me changed. It was not a break in the fragile sense, but a hardening. Julian expected a reaction. He wanted to see me sweat, stammer, or beg for a second chance to prove my worth. He thrived on the submission of others. Instead, I looked him dead in the eyes, adjusted my cuffs, and kept my posture perfectly straight. "You are absolutely right, sir," I said, keeping my voice level and dry. The conference room went dead silent. Julian blinked, his eyes narrowing slightly as he tried to read my lack of anger. "I am clearly not ready for your league." I stood up, gathered my leather portfolio with steady hands, and walked out of the room without looking back. As the heavy glass door closed behind me, I could hear the immediate rise in murmuring from the executives inside. Nobody walked out on Julian Vance, especially not after being publicly humiliated. But I was not leaving in defeat. I was walking out with a clarity I had not felt in years. Julian Vance was a powerful man, 46 years old, with a personal net worth north of $300 million. He was featured on the covers of major financial magazines, sat on prestigious charity boards, and lived in a sprawling estate with his philanthropist wife, Clara. They had 2 children at elite East Coast academies, and to the public, he was the gold standard of corporate leadership. But the foundation of his empire was built on exploitation, intellectual theft, and fear. I had been working as the director of acquisitions for a smaller, more agile competitor, and we had spent months trying to secure a revolutionary technology developed by a brilliant engineer named Nadia Thorne. Her system, a proprietary medical logistics software, could streamline supply chains for critical pharmaceuticals, saving lives and cutting costs across the country. I had spent the last year building a relationship with Nadia. I did not treat her as a transaction. I listened to her story. Her sister, Sophie, suffered from a rare neurological condition, and Nadia had built this technology specifically to help patients who needed rapid access to specialized medications. She did not want to sell her soul to a corporate conglomerate that would bury her technology behind a massive paywall. The proposal I had presented to Julian was a partnership that protected Nadia's control, guaranteed funding for research, and ensured the software remained accessible to public health organizations. The $2,800,000 was merely the initial signing payment, but Julian had not bothered to read past the first page. He saw the structure, saw that he would not have absolute control, and decided to crush it. He wanted Nadia's technology, but he wanted it on his terms, which meant taking everything from Nadia. I sat in my sedan in the underground parking structure for nearly an hour, feeling the cold leather of the steering wheel. I thought about the executives who had watched the humiliation, and I thought about the people Julian had destroyed over the years to feed his ego. I remembered my former colleague, Lydia, a brilliant marketer who had been ridiculed by Julian in public until she could no longer take the pressure and attempted to end her life. Julian had taken her strategy, rebranded it, and claimed all the credit when it generated $40 million in revenue. I remembered Javier, a veteran research director who had been coerced into signing over his patent rights under pressure, only to be terminated for performance issues a week later. That was when I decided Julian Vance was going to learn the true cost of his arrogance. I was going to use the law, his own family, and the truth to dismantle his empire piece by piece. There would be no dramatic scenes, no illegal hacks, just the methodical application of pressure until he collapsed under the weight of his own corruption. I left the office that afternoon and drove straight to a diner on the outskirts of the city to meet Nadia Thorne. She was sitting in a booth in the corner, her fingers tapping nervously against her coffee cup. She looked up as I approached, her expression a mix of hope and anxiety. "Did he sign it?" she asked before I could even sit down. I slid into the booth and shook my head. "No. In fact, he tore it in half in front of the entire executive committee," I replied. Nadia deflated, her shoulders sagging. "I knew it. He wants to control everything, Dean. He does not care about Sophie or the clinics. He just wants the asset." I leaned forward, keeping my voice quiet but firm. "He does not just want the asset, Nadia. He wants to steal it. That is why we are changing our strategy." I told her about Julian's history, about Lydia and Javier, and how Julian operated. He was not just a tough negotiator. He was a corporate predator who used regulatory pressure to force independent creators into compliance. Nadia looked down at her hands, her voice trembling slightly. "He called me directly last week, Dean. He did not say it openly, but he made it clear that if I did not sell to Vance Enterprises, he would use his influence on the federal regulatory boards to stall our approval process indefinitely. He mentioned that it would be very easy for someone to raise concerns about the data privacy of our medical software. Sophie needs her treatments, and we need this technology to launch. If he blocks us, we are finished." I nodded. I had suspected Julian would use his regulatory connections. He had several allies on the trade commissions who owed him favors. But his threat was also his vulnerability. By threatening to block Nadia's software through regulatory manipulation, Julian was committing a violation of federal antitrust laws and attempting to restrain trade. I told Nadia that we were going to give Julian exactly what he wanted, access. But it would be on our terms. We were going to set a trap, and we were going to use his own greed to spring it. The plan required absolute precision. I had spent years analyzing corporate structures, and I knew that Vance Enterprises was 6 months away from its initial public offering. Julian had been inflating the company's valuation, making bold claims to institutional investors about proprietary technologies they had not yet secured. He had already factored Nadia's software into his prospectus, claiming they were on the verge of acquiring an exclusive licensing agreement that would generate $90 million in the first fiscal year. If the investors found out that the acquisition was not only uncommitted, but that Julian was using illegal coercion to secure it, the valuation would collapse, and the SEC would intervene. I reached out to a small network of people who had been wronged by Julian. The first was Leona Bennett, a former board member who had been forced out 3 years ago after she raised concerns about the company's accounting practices. She still had access to internal contacts and possessed documentation, showing that Julian was systematically inflating their cash reserves by shifting debts to off-balance sheet entities. Leona met me at a public library, passing over a USB drive containing encrypted financial reports. "This is dynamite, Dean," she whispered, her eyes scanning the quiet room. "If this gets to the underwriters, the public offering is dead. But you need more than just accounting discrepancies to take him down. You need to prove intent." I told her we were working on that. The next person I contacted was Harvey Cole, a financial investigative journalist who had tried to publish an exposé on Julian's predatory acquisition strategies 3 years prior. Julian had threatened the publisher with a multi-million-dollar defamation suit, effectively killing the story and blacklisting Harvey from major publications. Harvey was now working as an independent writer, and he was eager for justice. He had folders of verified complaints from smaller businesses that Julian had run into bankruptcy. Harvey agreed to draft the article, but he needed a smoking gun. Finally, I reached out to Zachary Boyd, a brilliant software engineer who had worked under Julian for 2 years. Zachary had developed a logistics algorithm that Julian had claimed as his own invention, firing Zachary the following week to avoid paying him his performance royalties. Zachary was more than willing to help. He created a secure, encrypted communication platform for our group to ensure that Julian's internal security team could not track our interactions. More importantly, Zachary modified a high-end digital recorder disguised as an executive pen, configuring it to bypass standard frequency sweeps so it could not be detected by the counter-surveillance equipment in Julian's private office. We had the team, we had the financial evidence, and we had the technology. But we still needed the key to Julian's inner circle. That key came from a source I had never anticipated: Clara Vance, Julian's wife. Leona Bennett had suggested reaching out to Clara. Clara was a prominent figure in the city's charitable organizations, but behind closed doors, her life was a nightmare of control and intimidation. I arranged a meeting with Clara under the pretense of discussing a corporate donation from my firm to her foundation. We met at a secluded garden cafe on the edge of the county, far from the corporate district. When she arrived, she wore oversized sunglasses and a silk scarf despite the overcast sky. As she pulled back her sleeve to reach for her tea, I saw the distinct purple bruises on her wrist, shaped like fingers. It was the physical evidence of Julian's private monstrousness. She looked at me with a tired, guarded expression, waiting for my pitch. I took a breath and told her the truth. "I am not here to talk about donations, Clara," I said, keeping my voice low. "I am here because I know what Julian is, and I want to help you end his control." Clara froze, her hand hovering over her cup. She slowly lowered her hand, her gaze dropping to the table. "You have no idea what you are dealing with," she whispered, her voice shaking. "The man you see in public is a performance. He controls everything. My bank accounts, my phone, my schedule. He threatened that if I ever left him, he would use his legal team to ensure I got nothing, and he would ruin the foundation I have built. I am a prisoner in my own home." I leaned forward, looking her in the eyes. "I have a team, Clara. We have his internal financial records, and we have proof of his illegal business practices. But we need your help. If we can prove his pattern of behavior, his legal threats will mean nothing, because his entire empire will collapse. We can secure your freedom, but you have to trust me." Clara sat in silence for a long time, watching the steam rise from her tea. Finally, she took off her sunglasses, revealing the dark circles under her eyes. "I have recordings," she said, her voice dropping to a bare murmur. "He has a habit of coming home late and boasting about how he ruins people. I started recording him on an old phone I kept hidden in my dresser. I have him admitting to financial fraud, talking about how he paid off regulators, and how he planned to force Nadia Thorne to sign over her patent. I also have recordings of him threatening me. If I give these to you, you must promise that he will not find out until it is too late." I gave her my word. She agreed to transfer the recordings to Zachary's secure server using an encrypted link he would provide. With Clara's evidence, we had more than enough to establish a pattern of criminal behavior. The next phase of the plan was to send Nadia into the lion's den. Nadia contacted Julian's office, claiming she had reconsidered his offer. She told his assistant that she had fired me after realizing my proposed contract was too complicated, and she wanted to deal with Julian directly. Julian, driven by his massive ego and the desire to secure the technology before the public offering, immediately scheduled a private meeting in his executive suite for the following Tuesday. On the morning of the meeting, Nadia met me in a hotel room near the corporate tower. Zachary was there, testing the recording pen. He handed it to Nadia, showing her how to activate it with a simple click of the cap. The microphone was optimized to capture clear audio, even from 10 feet away, and it had a built-in transmitter that streamed the data directly to Zachary's server in real time. If Julian discovered the device, the data would already be secured. Nadia took a deep breath, slipping the pen into her blazer pocket. "I am ready," she said. I watched her walk out of the hotel, feeling a heavy weight on my shoulders. I was putting her in a dangerous position, but she was determined to protect her sister's work. I sat at the hotel desk with Zachary, wearing headphones connected to the server. We waited for 40 minutes before the audio stream went live. We heard the heavy door of Julian's office open, followed by Julian's booming, patronizing voice. "Nadia, my dear, I am so glad you saw reason," Julian said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "I knew a sensible woman like you would realize that Dean Gifford was just trying to use you to advance his own career. He is a relic of the past, a dinosaur who does not understand how modern business works." Nadia played her part perfectly, sounding hesitant and submissive. "Thank you, Mr. Vance. I just want to make sure my technology is protected and that we have the resources to continue our research." Julian laughed, a dry, mocking sound. Of course. We will take care of everything. But let us be realistic. A technology developed by an independent researcher always faces immense skepticism. If you sign this agreement, we will patent the system under the Vance Enterprises name. You will have a comfortable position as our chief consultant, but the intellectual property belongs to us. That is the only way the market will trust it." Nadia hesitated, then asked, "What if I want to keep the patent rights? What if we structure it as a joint venture?" Julian's voice immediately lost its warmth, turning cold and menacing. "Let me be very clear with you, Nadia. You do not have leverage here. If you do not sign this agreement today, I will make sure your software never sees a commercial release. I have friends on the advisory panels. One word from me about a security flaw or a data breach in your protocols, and your technology will be blacklisted. You will be tied up in regulatory reviews for the next 10 years, and by the time you get out, your software will be obsolete. You will have nothing, and your sister will not get her treatments. So, do we have a deal? Or do you want to watch everything you have worked for burn?" I felt a chill run down my spine as I listened to the recording. Julian was laying out his own extortion plan. Completely unaware that every word was being saved on a federal-grade server, he had just admitted to a conspiracy to restrain trade, a clear violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. But he was not finished yet. Nadia asked him why he had treated my proposal with such hostility, and Julian's response revealed the depth of his personal malice. "He is a second-rate strategist who does not know his place," Julian said, his voice filled with contempt. "Dean Gifford has been trying to play in my league for years, but he does not have the stomach for it. He thinks business is about fairness and handshakes. I have been quietly working to ruin his reputation in this industry for the last 12 months. I spoke to his firm's managing partners, suggesting he was becoming erratic and unstable. I blocked 3 of his major acquisition deals by offering private incentives to the sellers. I wanted to make sure he was cornered, so that when I finally pushed him out, he would have nowhere to go. People like Dean need to be taught their place. They are servants, nothing more. He reminds me of my wife, Clara. She has that same stubborn look, thinking she can stand on her own. But she learned, and Dean will learn too." I took off the headphones, my hands shaking slightly. I had suspected Julian was difficult, but I had not realized the extent of his personal campaign against me. He had systematically sabotaged my career, using his influence to poison my professional relationships. But my anger was immediately replaced by a cold, calculating focus. He had just confirmed everything. We had his financial fraud documented by Leona, his anti-competitive threats recorded by Nadia, and his domestic abuse and personal corruption recorded by Clara. It was time to execute the final phase of our strategy. We spent the next 72 hours organizing the release. We were not going to leak the information randomly. We were going to deploy it in a coordinated strike that would prevent Julian from using his wealth to cover up his crimes. First, Harvey Cole finalized his investigative article. It was a comprehensive, footnoted expose detailing Julian's history of corporate theft, financial manipulation, and personal abuse. The article included direct links to the audio recordings of Julian threatening Nadia and Clara, along with the encrypted financial files Leona had provided. Harvey submitted the article to 3 major national publications simultaneously, because the evidence was already verified and the public interest was immense. Due to the upcoming public offering, the editors agreed to publish the story at 9 o'clock on Friday morning. Second, Leona and Zachary prepared the packages for the regulatory and legal authorities. We drafted a formal complaint to the Securities and Exchange Commission detailing the financial fraud and the inflation of assets, citing specific off-balance sheet accounts. We also sent the packages to the board of directors of Vance Enterprises and to the compliance officers of the 5 largest institutional underwriters who were backing the initial public offering. Finally, we assisted Clara Vance in securing her legal protection. Clara had hired a top-tier family law attorney who specialized in high-profile domestic abuse cases. The attorney drafted a divorce filing that included the recordings of Julian's physical and verbal threats, along with a detailed accounting of Julian's attempt to hide marital assets through off-balance sheet entities, which constituted a dissipation of assets. Furthermore, Clara's attorney uncovered evidence that Julian had forged Clara's signature on several financial guarantees and foundation documents, a direct violation of California Penal Code Section 470. Since the signatures were forged, those agreements were void ab initio, nullifying Julian's legal control over the foundation's assets and exposing him to criminal forgery charges. The filing was scheduled to be submitted to the court at the exact moment Harvey's article went live. On Friday morning, our group gathered in Zachary's apartment watching the monitors. The clock ticked to 9 o'clock. Harvey's article appeared on the front pages of the financial news sites. The reaction was immediate. Within 15 minutes, the stock futures for Vance Enterprises began to tumble in the pre-market trading. By 9:30, the underwriters issued a joint statement announcing they were postponing the public offering indefinitely due to newly disclosed information. The board of directors called an emergency meeting, demanding Julian's immediate presence. While Julian was trapped in the boardroom with his directors, desperately trying to lie his way out of the crisis, I walked into the lobby of Vance Enterprises. The security guard, who knew me from my previous meetings, let me pass without question. I took the elevator to the penthouse suite and walked into Julian's private office. His administrative assistant was staring at her computer screen, her face pale as she read the news. I told her I was there to deliver a final package to Julian regarding the Thorn acquisition. She nodded numbly, gesturing toward the empty office. I walked in, sat in one of the leather chairs facing the desk, and waited. The door flew open 45 minutes later. Julian stormed in. His tie loosened, his face flushed a deep, angry red. He was shouting into his phone, slamming it onto the desk when the caller hung up. He did not notice me at first, gripping the edge of his desk as he gasped for air. When he finally looked up and saw me sitting there, his eyes widened with shock, then turned to pure rage. "What are you doing in my office, Dean?" he roared, stepping toward me. "Get the hell out before I have security throw you off the roof." I did not move. I remained seated, looking at him with a calm, steady gaze. The security team is currently busy assisting the federal agents who just arrived in the lobby. "Julian," I said, keeping my voice quiet, "your board of directors has just voted to suspend you as chief executive officer, pending an independent audit. The underwriters have canceled the public offering, and your major investors have pulled their capital. The Securities and Exchange Commission has filed a civil complaint against you for financial fraud, and the district attorney's office is preparing an indictment for forgery under California Penal Code Section 470. Julian stared at me, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to process the words. "You are lying," he whispered, though the anger had suddenly drained from his face, replaced by a gray, hollow panic. "You cannot prove any of this. I have lawyers. I have connections." "We have the recordings, Julian," I replied, standing up slowly. "We have the tape of you threatening Nadia Thorn, admitting to regulatory manipulation in violation of federal antitrust laws. We have the recordings Clara made of your abuse, and we have the documentation of the off-balance sheet accounts you used to hide assets. We also have proof of your company's systematic violation of the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, 29 United States Code Section 2101, when you laid off 35 research engineers last month without the mandatory 60-day written notice. The federal government is already auditing your payroll records. The agreements where you forged Clara's signature are void ab initio, and the court has already frozen your personal accounts under a domestic abuse restraining order. You have no assets, no company, and no allies left. You are done." Julian lunged forward, his fists clenched, his face contorted in a final desperate outburst of violence. I did not flinch. I pointed to the corner of the ceiling. There are security cameras in this room, Julian. The very ones you installed to monitor your staff. Right now, the compliance team and the federal investigators are watching this feed. If you touch me, they will add assault to your indictment. Julian's hands dropped to his sides. He seemed to shrink, the expensive wool suit, suddenly looking too large for his frame. He slumped into his leather chair, staring blankly at the polished desk. "Why?" he muttered, his voice barely audible. "Because of a $2,800,000 proposal? Because I hurt your pride? This is what you do when you cannot handle the business? You make it personal?" I looked down at him, feeling no pity, only a deep sense of justice. "This was never personal, Julian," I said. "This was about accountability. It was for Lydia, who almost died because you stole her work and broke her spirit. It was for Javier, whom you cheated out of his patent and fired in violation of the labor laws. It was for Clara, whom you abused and imprisoned for 12 years. It was for Nadia, whose software you tried to steal. And yes, it was for me, and for every other professional you treated as a stepping stone. You built your career on the silence of your victims. But the silence is over." I turned and walked out of his office, leaving him alone in the quiet room. The hallway was filled with employees packing their boxes, their faces filled with confusion and fear. As the company imploded around them, the aftermath was swift. Julian Vance was indicted on multiple counts of financial fraud, criminal forgery, and domestic abuse. He was sentenced to 8 years in a federal penitentiary and ordered to pay restitution of $12 million. The company's assets were restructured under new leadership, and Clara Vance secured her divorce, along with full control of the charitable foundation, which she renamed the Bennett Thorne Foundation. Nadia's software was acquired by a major healthcare company under a fair, structured partnership that preserved her patent rights and provided her with the funding she needed to expand her research. Sophie received her treatments, and the clinics now have the software they need to save lives. As for me, I did not return to the corporate acquisition business. Instead, Nadia, Clara, and I founded Restitution Partners, a firm dedicated to providing financial, legal, and strategic support to independent innovators and professionals who are targeted by abusive corporate figures. We help them protect their intellectual property and hold powerful predators accountable under the law. We have been operating for 2 years now, and we have helped dozens of creators secure their rights. Julian Vance is currently living in a modest condominium in Arizona, having served his sentence, his name permanently blacklisted from the corporate world. He works as a low-level consultant for local businesses, his reputation destroyed beyond repair. Sometimes I think about that day in the conference room and how close I came to showing my anger. But I am glad I remained quiet. The truth is a quiet weapon, but when applied methodically, it can bring down the tallest towers.